Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Welcome to the Ranking the Races series. Wait, no, I don't think I should call it that. Welcome to my D&D tier list for racial options. And that's better. Ever since my subclass tier list, I've been asked for this one. I've been putting it off, to be honest, because sure, I could do a tier list like everyone else, where I look at a racial option, like Tiefling, and say, Tiefling, B rank. Satyr, they're pretty good, S rank. And I could fill up this whole chart in a couple minutes. In fact, I did that, and it looks just like this. So if you want my tier rankings based on just my gut instincts, here it is. Now let's talk math for a bit. So technically speaking, you have a 1 in 20 chance to roll a critical, or 5%. But if you apply advantage, your odds improve to 9.75%. But if you really want to spike those numbers, then you need to consider joining my Patreon, because then I'm sending you my positive vibes. And who knows how much those odds will increase. I know some people will say 0, but if they do, I challenge them to prove it. What I'm saying is, why take the chance? Here are some amazing folks who didn't take that chance and click the link in my video description and support this channel at the Thaumaturge level. Airhead, Alex R, Vo, Bloody Nine, Atherzone, CJ, Chris C, Clement Brunette, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Eric Wasserman, FBKO5, Gishlife, Lightfoot, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jiriru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, KS, Lars V, Mark D, Mark Sexton, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Tazel, Thunderlock, Vu, and William Whittles. And an additional thank you to all the patrons of this channel. Let's get started. And what I've done is I've put the most valuable at the upper left and worked my way right under each tier, and then just kind of split them up as evenly as I could. I filled up this whole chart in no time at all, just by going off my gut instincts and my own biases for each racial option. And it would be pretty quick content to make. I mean, I could just go to one of these websites where somebody else has already uploaded the art to make various tokens, and I could whip up a video in no time at all. By the way, what are all the races here? There's like 79 published races for D&D. This isn't even half that amount. It says it was updated in December of last year, so that's just a few months ago. And what is with these rankings? This is not my chart, by the way. I think my favorite part is they put Tiefling at S tier and Feral Tiefling at E tier, and they are basically the same. Now that we can switch ability scores around, they are basically identical now. But I guess one's S and one's E. Also, is there really an F tier for races? I would argue there isn't. If I assign something an F, that's really saying there's nothing you can do to make an effective character with that race, and that is simply not true for any of the published races in D&D. Also, in some cases, a racial option that we would define as weaker can be the exact choice we need for certain builds. Like, I would not consider the Kenku a powerful race, but if I am looking for a racial option that's going to provide me advantage for certain skill checks, or I'm looking for a race that can mimic voices or sounds, then Kenku is the race I need. If I want to make a character with no dump stats, then even the vanilla human has a role to play. So no, I don't think there's such a thing as an F rank race in D&D. So instead, I'm using this S to D ranking chart because although there are no hopeless races, there's also no denying that there's a significant difference in the mechanical powers of some of their features. Advantage on some skill checks simply doesn't hold a candle to concentration and duration-free flight. It just doesn't. So how do I analyze the relative power of all these races? Well, this is how I do it. I go through every racial feature of every race, and I assign a value and add them up. The thing is, with 79 races and several times that amount of features, how'd you even keep it consistent? I might give resistance to cold damage one value at 8 a.m., but at 3 p.m., after 7 hours of going through it, I might give it a different value. Never mind the value I might give it when I wake up and start on this again tomorrow. So what I did is I started listing as many common racial features that I could think of, and I started assigning them values from 1 through 10 to use as a reference as I went through the list. That way, whether I'm assigning a value to Fey Ancestry on Tuesday or on Thursday, it's always going to be assigned the same value. I even went through about 25 races adding up values this way, but I encountered a problem. All those one value things started adding up. If a free tool proficiency is worth 1 and a free feat is worth 10, then are 10 tool proficiencies as good as a feat? Not a chance. So 1 to 10 simply isn't enough of a spread for racial features. After some adjusting, these are the guidelines I came up with. A value of 1 through 9 would be a very tiny benefit, or a ribbon feature. 10 through 20, the benefit is small, but it comes up. My standard there is dark vision is worth 10. 21 through 40 is a substantial benefit, maybe like a really powerful spell or something. Then 41 through 60 is an exceptional benefit. These are like the racial defining features for some races. Then 61 through 80 is a top tier racial feature. Really powerful stuff. And then, very specifically, 81 to 100, unlimited flight or something like that, and 125 for the free feat. Of course, assigning a value to any one feature is going to be subjective. It is impossible not to insert my own biases into these. If I value a higher movement speed more than you do, then we're going to come up with different rankings. It is not possible for me to adjust for that. So before I go over my reference guide, let's just be 100% clear, you will not agree with my scores here, because we're working off different experiences playing the game. These are my scores, and I am sharing them with you, but I'm not saying these are everyone's scores because they aren't. Here we go. The most valuable racial feature in the game, as far as I'm concerned, is a free feat. So I gave it the highest value, 125 points. Next highest, duration and concentration free flight, and this is always accompanied, of course, with an armor restriction. I gave it 100 points. Okay, so I'm going to go through the rest of the list in no particular order, or I guess this is the order I thought of them. What you're looking at are my actual notes that I made for myself. Limited flight. This is always a bonus action, usable proficiency bonus times per long rest, 50 points, and you get 58 if you can also hover. Ability score bonuses. So this might have been more complicated before we could just move everything around to where we want them, but Tash has happened and now you can just put your scores where you want them to be. So if you get a total of +2 on ability scores, that's low, so minus 20 points. Most of the races have a total of +3, so that's 0 points. If you get a +4, like a certain dwarf does, or half-elf, then you get 20 points. And the vanilla human gets 30 points for ability score bonuses for every ability score. A lot of races get free spells, but it's hard to standardize value because being able to cast a second level spell could mean you could cast Spike Growth, which you would cast all the time. Or it could mean you could cast Flame Blade, which you might cast if you down a troll and you need to finish it off maybe, but generally speaking, you're probably not going to cast it at all. So I left these fairly open. A free cantrip gets you 1 to 10 based on how good the cantrip is and whether you have a choice for the casting ability score or not. And then level 1 spells are 1 through 30, level 2 spells 1 through 40, and for those I'll take into account whether you can cast again using your own spell slots. Now, resistances are not of equivalent value. Resistance to force is almost never going to come up. 10 points. Same goes for radiant. I mean, if you're a monster fighting player characters, then resistance to radiant would come up constantly, but monsters don't do radiant damage very often, particularly the monsters that you end up fighting. Thunder is a bit more prevalent, so 12. Psychic a bit more yet, 14. Acid 15, cold 15, lightning 15. Fire is a bit more common, so I give it 17. Same for poison, 17. And I figure necrotic resistance is the most valuable resistance that any race gets because not only is it common, but you can't use absorb elements or protection from poison to get resistance through a spell. So I assigned it a value of 20. Disease hardly ever comes up, so disease immunity got 5. Phase Step, or whatever you want to call a bonus action 30-foot teleport to a place you can see that isn't casting a spell. I gave it a base 50 points, and if you get a nice rider to it, like some do, then it will be higher. Extra proficiencies. So races provide additional proficiencies all the time. Skills are the most common, and they are the best proficiencies to get. I gave 4 points per skill proficiency, or 5 if you get to choose from different skills. Tool and weapon proficiencies are super ribbon, so 1 point each. Of course, the mountain dwarf gets armor proficiency, light and medium armor, but no shield proficiency, so I gave it a value of 10. I know a lot of people would probably have given it more. Me, I've always thought it was okay, but overrated. However, I gave variations in speed a lot more value. Maybe more than you would. Let me know. But a 25 speed is going to lose you 20 points, or only 10 points if you're a dwarf and you can ignore movement penalties from heavy armor. 30 is the standard, so that gets you 0. Speed 35 gets you 20, and 40 speed gets you 40 points. Yeah, it's a lot. I find there's a ton of value to bigger speed. Speaking of speeds, if you get a swim speed or a climb speed equal to your walking speed, 10 points. And speaking of swimming, do you need water breathing? If you can breathe water or you don't need to breathe, 10 points. If you can hold your breath for a long time, 5-ish points. Varied a bit on how long you can hold your breath. Advantage on a certain type of saving throw or saving throws. This one was a little bit difficult. I basically did up to 35 points based on how frequently that saving throw is going to come up. Fey Ancestry, for example, which provides advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charm condition, is worth 10 points. I figured I'd better assign that because Fey Ancestry comes up all the time. It might be second to Dark Vision in how common it is. Speaking of Dark Vision, 10 points, and 15 if you have a 120-foot range. Trance, because there are so many elves in D&D, 10 points. Telepathy, I gave 15 points most of the time, though there were a couple cases where there were limitations, so I lowered it a bit. And natural weapons. So these are usually ribbons, like ribbon features. So I gave 4 points if you get a D4 plus your strength, or 5 points for a D6. But if you don't need a hand, like it's not claws, then I doubled it. And the reason I did that is because it means you could have a shield, you could be grappling someone, and you could still be making attacks. So that gives that natural weapon a lot more value. And that's it. Of course, there are tons more racial features than I listed, but I decided to tackle them as I came to them, using the reference guide that I just showed you as kind of a guideline for point values. Then I went through every race in the game I could find. Went feature by feature, assigned a score, then added them up for every race. The lowest score was a measly 25. The highest was 135. So I listed all the races in order from highest score to lowest, and I broke them up into 5 similarly sized groups. So S tier is going to include all the races that got 96 points up to 135. A tier will be from 73 points to 92. B tier from 64 points to 72. C is 50 to 62 points. And D tier is 25 to 49 points. There will be 16 races per tier, except the D tier, which will only have 15. Now, once again, this is where my gut instincts put all these races. Well, when I put the races in order on the tier chart, I put the highest on the leftmost side and worked my way to the right, just like I did here. Then I looked at that chart. Then I compared it to this chart that I had made based on my gut instincts. And wow. I mean, a lot of them are close, but some of them. I mean, one of the races that I figure on this screen is D tier. When I added up the values, it went to A tier. One of these, Minotaur, Tiefling, Feral Tiefling, Locantha, the Eladrin from the Dungeon Master's Guide, Kenku, Half-Orc, Leonin, Simic Hybrid, Verdant, Reborn, Dragonborn, the Dragonborn variants from Wildmouth that both suck, and the Vanilla Human from the Player's Handbook. These were the races I figured would be the D tier rankings. One of these races ends up being A tier. Then check out my A tier. We've got the Satyr, Astral Elf, the Chromatic Dragonborn, the Metallic Dragonborn, the Lotsudin Halfling, Hobgoblin, Autognome, Changeling, Githzerai, Warforged, Mountain Dwarf, Tortle, Centaur, Stout Halfling, Duergar, and Deep Gnome. I think those are all pretty good races. Well, guess what? One of them is going to be C tier. So after doing all that effort, I ended up with a tier chart, and I wasn't sure I agreed with some of the rankings. I mean, in some cases, I highly disagreed with some of the rankings. So what I did is I went back to the feature values for some of the biggest surprises, and I kind of went through them again. I thought maybe I added them up wrong, maybe I assigned something too much or too little. But you know what? I kind of ended up thinking that the values I had assigned to their features were actually pretty fair, or pretty much what I felt was in line. It's just that the totals ended up putting them on this chart in a wildly different position than I would have guessed, which made me think something else. Maybe this tier chart that I made based on my gut instincts isn't very good. Maybe this is just an expression of my preconceived notions regarding the power of some of these races rather than their actual mechanical value. So as I rank these races, you're going to find out that this chart here ends up being not a good representation of what we're going to end up with. And I knew that if I do those videos, you're going to highly disagree with some of them as well. And I might even agree with you. But these rankings are going to be determined by the values for each of their features added up, and I will show you what values I gave to which features. Then I'm going to put them up on the tier chart, and I'm not going to change it just because I don't like the results. So there are a lot of races here, and if I'm going to discuss the values for all of their features, then this needs to be a series where I split it up into digestible videos. So here is how they will be split up. Tomorrow, I will be releasing my first tier ranking for races, and obviously I'm going to start with the player's handbook. So in tomorrow's video, come back tomorrow, I will tier rank all the races in the player's handbook, and I will give you a bit of a spoiler right now. The player's handbook didn't do very well. Honestly, that shouldn't be a huge surprise. Power creep is real, folks. Anyways, we're going to be covering the 15 races in the player's handbook in my next video. Then I'm going to tackle the big one, Monsters of the Multiverse. There are 33 races in that monster of a book, so I need to split it up. I am going to split it up alphabetically, so in the first part of Monsters of the Multiverse, we're going to cover the races from A through G, and that's 17 races, and then H onwards in part 2, and that's 16 more. Then there will be a fourth video, and I will be covering what I'm calling my campaign setting video, because I'm including Spelljammer, the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, Wildmount, Ravnica, and Eberron. That will be 17 more races. And finally, there will be a fifth video, which I'm calling Bits and Pieces. This one is going to have all the one-offs and whatever else is left over. Custom lineage, Dragonborn variants from Fizbins, the Owlin, Ravenloft lineages, the Grung, the weird Eladrin example subrace from the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Verdun, the Kender, the Locantha, and the Leonin. And that is 14 more, and it will total up to 79 races. And in that final video, you'll see how every race ranked up to the others based on the system I used. And once again, what you're seeing on your screen isn't it. So join me tomorrow and you will find out what race is better than all the rest. Wait, no, I mean, what mechanical racial features in D&D add up to a higher value? Hope you'll tune in. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.